not yet begun. These were to take another 13 years to construct and finish. Here, the narrative is abruptly interrupted by the statement, and King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. If Hiram was sent by the king of Tyre before the work was begun, why did Solomon, at this particular stage, need to send and fetch him out of Tyre? Had he gone back to Tyre? There is not the smallest hint or indication of that. Now let us change our hypothesis a little bit. Let us suppose that there were two artisans of the same name, engaged at the work of the same famous structure. Then, doesn't everything seem to fall in place? If we review the narrative, the first Hiram is a son of a woman of the daughters of Dan. He arrives at the beginning of the building of the temple. He is an all-round artisan, skillful to work in stone, timber, gold, iron, etc. And he supervises the building operations till the basic structure was completed. At this stage, Hiram II, who is the son of a widow woman of the tribe of Naphtali, comes into the picture. Everything except the molten brasswork had been done. Why did Hiram I not do it? Why did Solomon need to send for Hiram II? It is evident that Hiram I was no longer available. Why? The traditions of masonry supply the answer, a very clear and natural answer. Hiram was dead. So the first Hiram was dead. In the second book of Chronicles, we go back, and the various things which Hiram had made is narrated, and then we go on to, I quote, and the pots also, and the shovels, and the flesh hooks, and all their instruments did Hiram, his father, make to King Solomon, for the house of the Lord of bright brass. We find now that a parenthetical remark has been interjected into the narrative, evidently to emphasize that all the work of brass done by Hiram, his father, were of bright brass, that is, malleable brass, while the pillars, bases, and levers, as mentioned in the context, were of cast brass. This distinction is associated with the words his father. Whose father? Obviously, the father of the person whose work is being described. So, when we consider this in conjunction with the fact that Abif, A-B-I-F, is originally a Hebrew word meaning his father, and the word Abi or Abe being frequently used by the ancient Jews as a title of honor meaning father, we can arrive at the conclusion that the only explanation which makes everything plain and clear is that Hiram the son made the pillars, the levers, etc. of cast brass, and that his father, Hiram, made the pots, basins, etc. of bright or malleable brass. In this view, the words his father, that is in original, Abif, are rendered quite natural and intelligible in accordance with our Masonic tradition. According to Masonic traditions, the Hiram whose death occurred immediately preceding the completion of the temple is named Hiram Abif. This designation becomes significant only in view of the fact that another Hiram, that is his son, also was a superintendent at the building of the temple and finished the work which his father would no doubt have finished had he lived a little longer. The Hiram whom Solomon fetched out of Tyre is described as a son of a widow. This description now fits in perfectly because if Hiram Abif was dead and his wife alive, his son Hiram would naturally be the son of a widow. Brethren, this is just a presentation of one among several interpretations which exist today about the same thing. I do not wish to comment or give my opinion on what the true story is. My intention is simple: to stimulate you to start thinking on the subject, and many more. However, regardless of his origin and the number of such persons engaged in the construction of King Solomon's temple, Hiram's role in highlighting the virtue of fidelity and of valor in the throes of death, in addition to accentuating the immortality of the soul, make for one of the most sublime characters in the annals of mankind, worthy of emulation with pride and respect. May the legend of Hiram Abif live for a long, long time to come. Thank you, brother.
Thank you very much, Regional Grand Master, for your illuminating address. Thank you. I now request Dr. P.K. Muthukumaraswamy to come to the stage and give his speech. Thank you very
much. Virtual Master, distinguished members of the faculty, if I may call you so, members of the audience. May I know how many of you are Master Masons of 5 years or less? And how many of you are not past masters? Okay, not bad then. At the outset, let me set to rest Right Worship Brother Dr. Beja Raja's apprehension of seminars going unreported, Masonic education going unreported. I have taken out a little bit of your responsibility, and I have decided to circulate a small book to all the audience, which I would request you to organize right now. This book is a mine, M-I-N-E, mine, a book which you can mine for Masonic information in various different aspects. It has been a collection of articles over a long period of time, but to give you a fairly in-depth knowledge of Freemasonry as it is today and as it was in the past, both. So I would request my young friends that are here to start diligently reading possibly one chapter at a time per day. It's hardly 3-4 pages, short pages. I'm sure you will find it interesting.
If I may interrupt, may I ask you to request the Regional Master, Right Worship Regional Master, to release the book and present the first copy to you, to this audience.
Brethren and distinguished brethren on the dais, I have much pleasure. Evidently, it has been released much earlier. Giving this little piece of enlightenment to all the masters and was of course, and today I have the pleasure of presenting the first copy.
That's right. Now that the book is circulated, I would also request you not to flip through the pages right now. Keep your curiosity a little at bay and start flipping through the pages a little later, and maybe we can comment on this afterwards. I've got 15 minutes to speak. The topic which I had chosen for myself was, what do we do? Rather, why do we do what we do? The topic is, why do we do what we do? And the idea was to try and explain some aspects of Masonic symbolism. Unfortunately, I'm a very slow starter. I need a stimulus. I don't speak very well unless the audience interacts with me. And since I see a lot of, not a lot, at least a few of you who are new to Masonry, may I request you to raise a few questions as to what you would like to know about our Masonic rituals, because that is what we are doing, basically. And starting off with perhaps 1 or 2 questions, I'll be able to proceed whilst others think of their own questions. May I? Last row, please. Last row. Last row. Okay. Come.
Why do the senior warden raise the column and junior warden?
Done, sir. Again, anything else, please? The columns and what we do with them. Any other question?
Why we entered upon this to take 3 steps to the altar?
Okay, why steps? Advancing to the east, okay. Okay. A very oft asked, difficult, tough question. Okay. I think there are some entered apprentices here. Fellow crafts? All masterpieces, no? There's a fellow craft, yeah. Okay. 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 Fine. Maybe after the meeting. Anything else? Please, please. So we have about advancing to the east. We have about the columns. That's all. You are at my mercy then. Yes, please. Yep. Okay. The various preparations of initiation. And then left to me. Whatever I want to ask, I can talk, is it? Okay. I'll start with your question first because that relates very directly to Masonic symbolism. The various modalities of preparing a candidate for initiation. We all know how it is done. You wear a peculiar dress. You are blindfolded. You have a rope called a cable tow around your neck in the form of a noose, no less. You wear ill-fitting footwear. Your breast is made bare. You step off with your left foot. You kneel on your left knee. So these are some of those things which happens when you enter the lodge for the first time, when you are initiated. Why do we do this? Let me start with the noose, or rather, the officially called cable tow, or simply a rope about your neck. During the course of the ritual, the deacons will say that the candidate is approaching with all humility, seeking the knowledge of Freemasonry, or something to that effect. And for all practical purposes, you can take it that the rope you wear about your neck at the time of initiation is a symbol of humility. It is not an implement to punish you with, although that explanation was grafted on to the ritual subsequently. It is more a symbol of humility. The proof is there in the Holy Bible, Book of Kings. There's a verse which says, they put on sackcloth, a rope about their necks, came before the king and begged him, pray, let us live. In submission, they don't want to be punished. They want to show that they are submitting to the king's authority. They don't want to be killed, executed. So they wear sackcloth, they put a rope about their necks and come before the king and say, pray, let us live. So that is the first evidence of having a rope about the neck as an emblem of humility. There are very many multiple other examples of the rope being a sign of humility, right up to the 12th or 13th century.